We now welcome on Parker Thune of 247 Sports. Is it 247 or 247, Parker?
Oh man, that's an interesting question because even people within the network will say both. There is no
Right.
clear
Okay.
answer as to
Uh,
whether it is 247 or 24/7. I've found myself saying both. You will find people employed by the network that will refer to their employer as 24/7 Sports or as 247 Sports or both. So it's literally whatever you want it to be.
okay. Well, also, he's with the ref in the Ref Radio Network, host there as well. Thank you for joining us, man. Really appreciate it. He's in Orlando right now at the Under Armour All-American game, kicking off later this afternoon on Tuesday afternoon, I should say. So, Parker, what's the experience been like down there? You've seen the practices leading up. I've seen you tweet some videos and stuff. Jackson Arnold, I think there's 7 total guys in the 2023 class down there right now. And by all accounts, they seem to be tearing it up.
That by all means. And there would have been 8 had it not been for Derek LeBlanc, who elected to practice for Oklahoma leading up to the bowl game rather than participate in the All-American game. But Jackson Arnold is making a very, very strong case for the number 1 overall player, for the title of number 1 overall player in the 2023 class. There's one more rankings update that will come. And if Arnold turns in a dynamic performance at the actual game this afternoon, he's going to be very, very tough to deny. Now, that said, you do have the arch factor, and ESPN is really the only service that has that. I call it the arch conspiracy because there are a million different reasons why I disagree with Arch Manning being number 1 overall. It's not that I don't think he's good. It's just that I think with the way that he hasn't put himself out there against elite competition, no Elite 11, no 7-on-7, no All-American game or All-American Bowl, really all you have to evaluate the kid off is the name on the back of his jersey and the tape. So if you looked at the tape against 2A high school competition in Louisiana, right, and you were evaluating based off of that and his name was anything other than Manning, you'd look at the tape and say, okay, arm talent's impressive. The frame's good. He has good control in the pocket. He's in command, but there's only so much we can reasonably project about the kid, seeing as how he hasn't gone up against competition that is on his level. And so I am very much of the opinion that if Arch Manning's name was anything other than Manning, he would be a top 150, maybe top 200 prospect, but that would be about the ceiling for him. And so I think what Jackson Arnold has done over the course of the past year is undeniably impressive in that he's continually put himself out there against the best of the best. And in every setting, in every circumstance, he has dominated. You go back to the Elite 11, he was not expected to win that thing. He showed up and won it running away. He's been easily the most impressive quarterback here at the All-American game. He racked up 57 total touchdowns, I believe 33 through the air and 24 more on the ground as a senior in the 6A circuit in the state of Texas, which is one of the more difficult classifications and one of the more talent-dense states in the entire country. And so at what point does the body of work become too much to ignore? And that's why I think a lot of the conversation in the aftermath of this weekend's game, not just this one, but the All-American Bowl in San Antonio as well, where we're going to get to see plenty of other Sooner commits / signees and other elite prospects from across the country in the 2023 class go head-to-head. I think a lot of the conversation coming out of this coming weekend is going to be, how do we not elevate Jackson Arnold to number 1? Because he's just been so undeniably impressive. And the other big standout for Oklahoma here in Orlando has been PJ Adebawore. I mean, the kid has been untouchable. He's gone up against offensive linemen that are 4 and in some cases 5-star prospects. I would refer you to 2 specific reps that he took against Miles McVay and Olasa Lynn, both of whom are committed to Alabama. Just absolutely torched both of them with 2 very different techniques. He goes up against McVay, he just speed rushes him, goes right around him effortlessly. And then going up against a Lennon, he just essentially grabs him by the shoulder pads and walks him backwards. Man, he is both incredibly fast and incredibly strong off the edge. And what's most encouraging is right now he's only about 230 pounds. He's a guy where if you evaluated him based on his strength and his power, you would you would liken him to somebody that's playing the position at 275, 280, right? He and DJ Hicks are very much cut from the same cloth in that regard. They are much stronger than their frame should reasonably permit right now. So he's at about 230 pounds this weekend in Orlando, which means by the time he steps on the field this fall, you can bet Schmidt will have him in the neighborhood of 245, 250. And if that's the case, to borrow a phrase that Brent Venables has used in reference to a couple of his defensive ends over the past few months, he is going to be hell on wheels and is going to be in the mix without question to play right off the bat, even if only in a rotational role.
Yeah, I think Sooner fans really want to know, especially going back to Jackson Arnold, all the hype around him being a 5-star first quarterback for Jeff Lebby. Does he have the potential to take on the starting role for the Sooners in the first year? We haven't heard from Dylan Gabriel yet, if he's going to come back or not, or what his plans are. But does Jackson Arnold have what it takes to potentially be a true freshman starting quarterback for the Sooners next season?
Does he have what it takes? Yes. Would that be my expectation? No, because I don't think the Sooners are going to want to rush Jackson Arnold along, if at all possible. And the way I look at this is what are the reasonable expectations for Oklahoma heading into 2023? I figure most coming off a 6-7 season would say if Oklahoma can win 9-10 games, that's sufficient for year 2 under Brent Venables. Now, you think back to the Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams dynamic, and I do see some parallels there because obviously I don't think it's a secret to anybody that much as Caleb Williams was much more physically gifted than Spencer Rattler in all areas of playing the position of quarterback, Jackson Arnold is leaps and bounds ahead of Dylan Gabriel in that capacity. But what Dylan Gabriel has is the advantage of having started for 4 years at the collegiate level. So the experience, the comfort factor within the offense is going to be far superior for Gabriel than it is for Arnold. So the difference between what these two are walking into heading into 2023 and what Williams and Rattler were walking into in 2021 is that in 2021, the expectation nationally was that Oklahoma was going to play for and potentially win a national championship. So there was almost an increased sense of urgency to get it done in 2021. And the margin for error was razor thin for everybody, not just Spencer Rattler, because it was championship or bust. That was the mentality. And so it wasn't terribly shocking when, after a few weeks of milquetoast play from Spencer Rattler, the Sooners go down big in the Cotton Bowl and Lincoln Riley pulls the wonderkin freshman off the bench, and lo and behold, Caleb Williams leads them to a comeback victory and possibly the most memorable Red River showdown of all time. In 2023, I think Dylan Gabriel will have more of a margin for error than Spencer Rattler did, simply by virtue of the fact that I don't feel as though Brent Venables is going to feel the crunch. He's not going to feel the immediate need to switch quarterbacks if things start to go awry for Oklahoma. And I don't think things are going to go awry nearly to the extent that they did in 2022. Obviously, that was, especially when you look at the TCU and Texas games, like that's just, it's very obviously a blip on the radar, not something that's going to become the norm at Oklahoma. But if the Sooners lose a couple games over the course of conference play, I don't think it's going to be cause for Brent Venables to tear it all down and throw the freshman in Jackson Arnold. And so what I am really encouraged to see is that all 7 of these guys appear to have really strong relationships with one another. I'm sure you saw the picture that circulated on social media, all 7 of them throwing the horns down. And there will be players among this recruiting class that will be difficult to keep off the field in year 1. Jackson Arnold's going to be difficult to keep off the field. PJ Adebawore and Peyton Bowen, it's going to be impossible to keep those 2 off the field. But I think when you are mindful of where you want these guys to be 2-3 years down the road, not just next year in 2023, as soon as they're in a Sooner uniform, you don't want to rush them along. And obviously, if they're ready to go right off the bat and they prove they're capable of stewarding rotational duty adequately, then by all means, throw them into the fire. But you don't want to put a guy into a situation that he's not ready for. And so I believe, especially having watched these guys over the course of the week at the All-American game practices and paying attention to the chemistry that Arnold and Jaquays Petaway have in particular, it's a really cool dynamic to see. But just seeing where so many of them are developmentally, where they're ahead of the curve, and yet they're going to get to campus at Oklahoma and they're not going to have to be rushed into the fray because of who Oklahoma already has on the roster and who they plan to bring in via the transfer portal. I'm not necessarily sure that I would count on Jackson Arnold seeing the field in a substantial capacity in year one. And I would say the same about many, if not all, of the incoming signees in the 2023 class. And that's not a referendum on their talent level, because Jackson Arnold's a guy that's probably going to be in New York City for the Heisman ceremony one day. But again, you just don't want to rush a guy into a situation that he's not 100% ready for and comfortable with.
So, sorry, this class as a whole, 24/7 has them as the 6th ranked overall class. Can you talk about just kind of, and I think there were 23 commits prior to signing day, and all 23 of those guys ended up signing, and you add 2 more in Peyton Bowen and one other.
Marcus Strong.
Thank you. Yes. So just talk about the job that Brent Venables and his staff did after a 6-7 season, like we saw, and just struggling throughout the year and seeing the talent level of this team, for this staff to have these guys committed and stay committed. How difficult of a job is that?
Well, I think it speaks to recruiting the right people, not just the right players, right? And this is something we've harped on over the course of the recruiting process, dating back to last January, February, when the commits started rolling in the 23 class under Venables and the new staff. When you have guys that are bought into the vision, and you have guys that are bought into the direction of a program, they're not going to be alarmed when the going gets rough and things get rocky. And the Sooners did have a couple of decommits down the stretch. They lost to Anthony Evans. They obviously lost Colton Vasek. All things considered, those were, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat it here, but those were probably the 2 most understandable decommitments that you could have had, because Anthony Evans' family was a whole bunch of Georgia fans, Georgia alumni, and obviously Colton Vasek was right down the road from the University of Texas, a Longhorn legacy. Those 2 hurt, but they made sense, right? You understood why. Even if you didn't like it, you understood why. And I think the ability to keep everybody else in the boat, despite a 6-7 campaign, and knowing what we know about the way that Oklahoma recruits, right? And you guys can kind of read between the lines here, but Oklahoma is not recruiting the way that Texas A&M's recruiting. They're not recruiting the way that Miami's recruiting, right? It's not as if there's an extenuating circumstance this 6-7 season. You're like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense why all these guys are still locked in with OU. No, the reason all these guys stayed locked in with OU is because Brent Venables and his assistants were able to identify players that not only rose up the rankings steadily over the course of the past year, i.e. PJ Adebawore, Samuel Masigo, even lower down guys like Logan Howland and Heath Ozida, the offensive tackles, guys that steadily continued to climb and climb and climb up the composite rankings. Not only did they identify players that, especially in hindsight, we can look at and say, yeah, those were pretty good evals, but they identified people, and I think PJ and Jackson as your they're not the only 2 5-stars anymore, because you got Peyton in the fold, but as the 2 5-stars that were sitting atop the class for, PJ committed in July. So for the last 4 or 5 months of the recruiting cycle, those 2 were kind of your crown jewels, one on offense, one on defense. But there's such phenomenal examples of the type of people that Venables and his staff have prioritized on the recruiting trail, because Jackson Arnold never wavered. Trust me, he had schools that tried to flip him. He had offers come in that he never announced, even after he committed to Oklahoma. He had a lot of compelling opportunities to look elsewhere, and he never even gave those schools the time of day. He was 100% locked in with Oklahoma from the time that he committed in late January. And meanwhile, I remember all the fuss about PJ, I think in November, when Ohio State started to heat up on him. And people were freaking out saying, oh, Oklahoma, they just coming off the West Virginia loss, obviously. How's Oklahoma possibly going to hold on to a 5-star edge rusher when they just lost Colton Vasek and they just lost to West Virginia, a school that they never lost to in Big 12 play? And I remember being on the phone with PJ, and he was just like, I remember letting him know that there was a lot of buzz about him in Ohio State and the potential of him opening things back up. And I said, dude, is any of this remotely legit? He said, oh man, I wouldn't have committed if I wasn't completely sold on Oklahoma. And yeah, they're struggling right now, but what can I do about it? I'm not in that locker room. I'm not in uniform there. But when I am, that's when I'll have the opportunity to make change. I can go in next year and be a freshman All-American, and we'll turn things around. And so I think seeing as how that was the message from your two top commits for the longest time until Peyton Bowen jumped in at the very tail end of the early signing period, that really helped set the tone for the remainder of the class. And even when guys had the opportunity and had reason to look elsewhere, maybe take a visit somewhere else or start to entertain the advances of another school. I think of a guy like Lewis Carter, who acknowledged to me and my colleague Brandon a couple of days ago that it was very, very hard for him not to take an Auburn visit circa late October, early November. But he said, look, OU was able to successfully convince me that what I had committed to was the right thing and that I needed to honor my commitment to that school. And moreover, all these guys, every single one of the 25 signees have an enormous group chat. And if there was ever a reason for one of them to look elsewhere, I can promise you the other 24 would have been all over him in that group chat, making sure that he didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see what this coaching staff has done, especially after the season we've been through. You hear the commitment. It's like I got chills a little bit when you're talking about PJ and him being committed to the team and what he's, potentially looking to do with the staff moving forward. I did want to go back to signing day because obviously we have probably one of the craziest recruitments and five-star Peyton Bowen. Can you give us a little insight on what that day was like, what was going through his head? Because I've never seen that before. I think that's got to be one of the craziest things I've seen.
Are you having?
I love to hear.
Are you having Vietnam flashbacks, Parker?
Oh man, I know I'm going to get asked about that recruitment for years to come. But oh man, I'm so glad it's over. And I guess we're almost 2 weeks clear of it now. My goodness, that was the biggest thorn in my side for so long. And I'm sure Brandon Drum will say the same thing. But man, in the end, it all made sense. Didn't make sense for especially the 24, 48 hours leading up to his signing with Oklahoma. But in the end, it all made sense because his heart was always at OU. The girlfriend was at OU. Jackson was at OU. He'd taken something like 15 unofficial visits to OU in 2022 to that point. And so when he committed to Oregon, I remember saying this as early as June, July, that he was not going to stick it out with Notre Dame. And there was never a time where I was worried about Notre Dame holding on to his commitment. And when he committed to Oregon, though, on National Signing Day, my first thought was, oh my goodness, this is a nightmare. Because that's really what it was. It was deja vu all over again to the David Hicks situation, right? And Sooner fans were fully expecting to get a commitment from the number one defensive lineman in America, and he pulls one over on everybody and commits to Texas A&M. And obviously, when he commits to Texas A&M, you understand, right, why Texas A&M was the pick. And with Oregon, Peyton Bowen had only ever taken one visit up there, had virtually no relationships whatsoever with anybody in that circle. And so he commits to Oregon, and everybody's first thought is, oh, well, you know what this is about, right? But in the end, it was kind of an all-time chess, not checkers move by Peyton because he had people in his camp that were very pro Notre Dame. He had people in his camp that were pro Oregon. Nobody in his camp was as pro Oklahoma as Peyton was. So I think, especially when you hear him acknowledge in media day interviews from a few days ago at the All-American game festivities that his parents essentially forced him to take Oklahoma off the table for his signing day announcement. Him picking Oregon was his way of communicating to everybody, hey, I'm going to do what I want, and you better listen to what I have to say and what my desires are for this whole process. Because I always go back to the reaction that his mom had when he pulled the Oregon hat. And if you watch the video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He picks up the Notre Dame hat, and she is bubbling over. She's trying to contain her excitement. He drops that hat. He picks up the Oregon hat, and oh my goodness, instantly her face goes from overjoyed to distraught. And in that moment, I can only imagine that what mom's thinking is, well, I wanted him to go to Notre Dame. That was my preference. But now not only is he not going to Notre Dame, he's going to a school that's 25 hours away instead of 2. And all of a sudden, it's the worst of both worlds for me as a mother. And so, again, all-time chestnut checkers move by Peyton to get everybody in his circle on board with Oklahoma.
Crazy. We'll get you out of here on this. You're obviously at the game right now, and you got a busy day ahead of you. But this class overall, anybody not named Jackson Arnold, PJ Adebawore, Peyton Bowen out of this class that you're most looking forward to, that might, I don't want to say diamond in the rough, but a guy a lot of fans may be overlooking as, hey, this guy could potentially be a dude down the line?
Yeah, I think there are several that fit that bill, and I'll try to keep it to one just because I don't want to go through the entire class.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these guys are really, really good at evals, to be honest. Like as I look through Oklahoma's 2022 class, and it was kind of by necessity because everything came together so late with the coaching change and the turnover and staff. But as I looked through Oklahoma's 2022 class, even in the moment back then, you could just look at some of those guys, i.e. Cedric Roberts, Alton Tarver, I'm trying to think of a couple other conspicuous examples, but you could just look at certain guys and say, they're probably never going to crack it at Oklahoma. As I look at this class top to bottom, I don't see any of that. I don't see any dead weight. I don't see any guys that don't have the legitimate potential to contribute in a big way for Oklahoma at some point in their career. I would say the guy that I would highlight, and he's a top 100 player nationally, so he's by no means under the radar, but he just doesn't get talked about a whole lot for whatever reason. Samuel Masigo, the 4-star linebacker out of Crandall, Texas. That's a guy that had Power 5 offers to play wide receiver. He had Power 5 offers to play safety. In the end, he settles on a Power 5 offer to play linebacker under Brent Venables at Oklahoma. And I think in a year or two, Omasigo is going to be a dangerous cheetah at Oklahoma because he fits that bill. He fits that mold to a T. And it's Deshaun McCullough for right now, right? We know this. And Deshaun McCullough is a guy that has the potential to be a first-round NFL draft pick by the time he's done in Norman. But once McCullough's time has come and gone, that position is Omasigo's to lose. Him and Lewis Carter will be in competition. I think what's really encouraging about having the two of those guys in that class is you don't have to pigeonhole them into a single position. Right? They don't have to be cheetahs. If one wins the job at cheetah, you can slide one of them inside alongside the likes of Jaron Kanek or potentially Phil Picciotti at that point. And you're confident in your linebacker core, and you got 3 guys that are going to fly to the ball and be very, very tough to move the ball against via the run or the pass at that level of defense. And so Sammy's also just a super, super intelligent, super outgoing, super nice kid. Just a joy to be around, somebody that I've really enjoyed getting to know and follow and cover on the recruiting trail. And I get the sense he's going to be a fan favorite. And he already has a lot of the fan base behind him for just the way that he has recruited his peers on social media. I know it didn't last in the end, but he was instrumental in getting Colton Vasek to Norman initially. He is all in on Oklahoma, always has been from the minute that he took that first campus visit and met with Venables and the new staff. He and his family were sold on OU almost immediately. And he wears that on his sleeve as much as anybody in this class. And being a small town Texas kid, he's got that it factor, right? He's gonna have that work ethic when he shows up to campus where there's never a point where he's going to get complacent. And so much as he has continued to rise and rise and rise steadily, not all at once, but just incrementally, steadily over the course of the last year or so, because he was a mid-range 3-star prospect as recently as April or May of 2022. And so much as he has continued to make that incremental rise, I think he's a guy that I look at as somebody that's going to continue to make incremental progress and just get better and better and better throughout his career as a Sooner.
Love it. Parker, the busiest man in the recruiting world, down in Orlando, ready to go to the Under Armour All-American game. Appreciate you taking the time, Parker, and good luck as well. And is your trip to San Antonio as well, right?
Yes, sir. It's going to be a busy next few days. I'm gonna be honest. This trip to Orlando has already kind of taken out of me. I'm tired of eating restaurant food. I would love to have a home cooked meal, but gonna power through. It's January 3rd, the morning of the 3rd, as we sit here. I'll be back in Norman for good after this whole cycle of travel on January 8th. So getting close.
Well, safe travels, man. Appreciate you jumping in with us.
Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, anytime, guys. Take care.